for Marion County is now in session. Now we'll have Ethan Patty presiding. May be seated and come to order.
Ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's return the juries, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed your evening. Did anyone have any difficulty with anyone attempting to speak with them about the case? Anyone see, hear, or read anything about the case? All negative responses. And you all have the pads you should have. Very good. All right. State, call your next witness.
You swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes. Mr. McCourt.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the court reporter?
Kathleen Schmidt, KathleenSchmidt.
Where do you work, ma'am?
The Marion County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been with the sheriff's office for?
I've been there 25 years.
What is your current position with the sheriff's office?
I'm a forensic crime scene technician.
How long have you been in that position?
About 8.5 years.
And prior to being a forensic crime scene technician, what other positions did you hold?
When I started at the Sheriff's Office, I was 2.5 years in the accounting department, and then I moved to the evidence division, and I was the evidence custodian for 14 years, and then moved to crime scene.
What kind of training do you have to be a crime scene technician?
We have 16 weeks of on-the-job training, and then we do a basic 40-hour crime scene investigation class, and then from there we have classes that we take throughout the year, different specialty classes.
What are some of those specialty classes you've taken?
I've taken, bloodstain pattern analysis, shooting reconstruction, buried bodies and surface skeletons, infant death investigations.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about the shooting reconstruction classes you've taken?
The shooting reconstruction class was a 40-hour class. The instructor was Jan Johnson. She's a forensic, she's been in forensics for a lot of years. I've taken other classes with her. And basically what they teach us is we're trying to reconstruct the scene to show where maybe the shooter was or the general location that the shooter was in when the shots were fired. And we do this with trajectory rods to project the path of the bullet.
Are you also trained in looking for things that may be indicative that a projectile has struck a surface?
Yes.
How many cases do you think you've worked, if you have an approximate number, where somebody was shot or there was a shooting?
Probably between 50 to 75.
And day to day in your position as a crime scene technician, what are your duties?
I respond to crime scenes when a deputy or a sergeant would call for me. There I would process the scenes and collect evidence, do a report on it, submit my evidence to the property room. I also do in-house processing. When deputies collect items or detectives collect items and turn it in, they may request that it be processed for DNA or fingerprints, that sort of thing.
I want to direct your attention back to the afternoon of September 15th, 2015. Were you working that day?
I believe it was the 14th.
14th.
September 14th.
September 14th.
Yes.
Did you go to the Cloud 9 nightclub on that day?
Yes, I did.
What was it that brought you to the Cloud 9 nightclub?
The evidence division commander told me that Sergeant Miller had requested that I come there to help them with the scene.
And Sergeant Miller is who?
Well, presently, he is our assistant commander in the evidence division. He was sergeant over in the major crimes division at that time.
Approximately what time did you go to the nightclub that day?
I believe it was about 2:30, 2:40 in the afternoon.
When you go to a crime scene and you're going to be looking for evidence, documenting evidence, tell the jury what steps you follow when you arrive at the scene.
The first thing I do is photograph. I have a scene card that I write my information on. I take a photograph of that scene card. It tells the location, the date, and time. And then I would start photographing everything around the scene. Then it just depends on what kind of a scene it is or what took place. I get information from the deputy, or in this case it was Sergeant Miller, as to what they're looking for or what they think happened, and then I would proceed from there.
Did you take photographs of the scene that day?
Yes, I did.
Did you collect any evidence that day?
Yes, I did.
May the record reflect I'm showing the defense what has been marked as State's Exhibit Q, R, and S. S is a composite exhibit, separate photographs numbered 1 through 19. They looked just like yesterday.
I'm first going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit Q. Can you take a look at that and tell me what it is?
Yes, this is a PowerPoint presentation. This is one that you put together from my photographs. I viewed it on November 17th and signed it here.
Show you State's Exhibit R. You recognize that?
Yes. These are photographs that I took on here the same day you put them on the CD, and I initialed it.
You had a chance to look at those photos?
Yes, I have.
I want to go ahead and show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit S. It's 19 separate photographs numbered 1 through 19. Can you take a look at them? You recognize those?
Yes.
What are they?
These are the photographs I took at the scene.
Okay. And do the photographs in State's Exhibit S also appear in the PowerPoint and on the CD containing the photographs?
Yes, they do.
And do the photographs fairly and accurately depict how the scene of Cloud 9 looked on September 14, 2015?
Yes, they do.
And do the photographs on the 2 CDs also depict how the area looked on that day?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, the State will move State's Exhibit Q into evidence as State's Exhibit 30.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
State's Exhibit Q for identification will be received in evidence as State's Exhibit 30.
This time, Your Honor, the State will move State's Exhibit R into evidence as State's Exhibit 31.
No objection on behalf of Mr. Smith.
No objection, Your Honor.
State's Exhibit R for identification will be received as State's Exhibit 31.
And the State will move State's Exhibit S, Composite Exhibit S 1 through 19 into evidence as State's Composite Exhibit 32, A through S.
No objection.
No objection.
No objection.
State's Composite Exhibit S will be received in evidence as State's Exhibit 32, A through S.
May I publish State's Exhibit 30?
You may.
As I go through the photographs, I'm going to ask you to describe to the jury what it is that you're looking at in the photo.
Okay.
Starting with the first photograph here, can you describe to the jury what it is they're looking at?
That's the front entrance of the Cloud 9 nightclub.
Second photograph?
That is the front entrance. Once again, I'm standing to the north looking south. That's Pine Avenue that you see.
Now, what is that item right there, the tall pole in the left foreground of the photograph?
Okay, say that again.
Do you know what that pole is?
A light pole? Okay, that is looking at the southeast corner of the building. I'm looking north, same entrance that you saw. Pine Avenue would be to the right, and the parking lot for this location is to my left.
Now, while you're there at the scene, do you see anything in the corner of the building nearest to you that catches your attention?
Yes, it's kind of hard to tell from that distance, but there were two small holes in that metal panel that's on the southeast corner of the building.
Looking at the next photograph.
Yes, you're looking a little bit closer at it. I think I can see the one hole. The other hole is a little bit more difficult to see at this distance.
The next photograph.
That's turned just a little bit to my left, and that's the parking lot. You can still see the same corner, the southeast corner of the building. And that's turned a little farther to my left. I'm actually looking west from the street, looking west at the parking lot. Pretty much the same, still looking at the southeast corner of the building. And there I moved in closer. You can see both holes now. There's the lower one is probably about 3 inches from the sidewalk. The other one is about 12 inches high. These are what we call pointers. We use these to mark certain items so that we can refer back to them. And so this would be referred to as the hole at pointer A and the hole at pointer B. And that's a close-up with a scale of measure in the frame of the hole at pointer A. And that's the hole at pointer B, a close-up of that with a scale of measure. This is the yellow rod that you see. Is called a trajectory rod, and I inserted it in the hole at pointer A and found where it exited the building on the east side.
When you saw the trajectory rod go through, did you then do any literally digging?
Well, when I tried to insert the rod through the hole at pointer B, it would not. I couldn't find an exit hole where it exited the building. So we, Sergeant Miller and I, used a screwdriver. This metal panel on there has screws in it, and so we loosened those panels, and I was able to pull that panel out far enough where I could get my hand behind it and scraping the dirt out. I tried to find an exit hole in there, I thought, or not an exit hole, but maybe where the projectile had hit, and I couldn't find anything, so I started scraping the dirt out, and that's what you see there is the dirt that I scraped out from behind that panel.
Was there anything in the dirt that caught your attention?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, there were some little fragmented pieces that looked like projectile. And there, you can kind of see some fragmented pieces in the center. It's hard to distinguish them from the dirt. Those are, that's a close-up of some of the pieces that I pulled out. And when we got everything, or when I raked everything out and cleaned the dirt off and picked the pieces out, that is what we found in the dirt.
The record reflect I'm showing defense counsel was marked as State's Exhibit T. Now I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit T. Take a look at that item and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What is it?
These are projectile fragments recovered from the dirt inside the southeast corner of the building of Cloud 9.
How do you recognize that item as containing its fragments?
This is my handwriting on the front. This is my initials and ID number on the back where I sealed it.
Does that item appear to be the same or substantially similar information to when you placed it into evidence?
Yes, it does.
And are the fragments contained in here the same fragments that are contained in the photograph up on the screen?
Yes.
At this time, the state moves State's Exhibit T, that is State's Exhibit 33.
No objection.
No objection.
State's Exhibit T for identification will be received in evidence as State's Exhibit 33.
While you were at the scene, did you look in the area on the sidewalk directly in front, kind of in the area directly in front of the club?
Yes.
Did you see anything there that caught your attention?
Yes, there were some pit marks on the sidewalk that we referred to them as suspected ricochet marks, where something had struck the sidewalk.
Did you photograph those?
Yes, I did.
Did you use easels when you photographed them?
I did.
This photograph here, what does that mean?
Okay, the yellow markers that you see out there are what we call easels, and they're numbered, and just like with the pointers, we use those to mark items of evidence that you maybe can't see from a distance, and then you can refer to each number so that you know which one you're talking about. And this is a close-up of the mark that was at easel number 1 with a scale in the frame. And that's a overall shot. Again, you can see where easel 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. This is the mark at easel number 2, the mark on the sidewalk. And that's an overall, again, the same picture that you saw where you can see where easel number 2 is the one off to the right. That's easel number 3, or the mark at easel number 3 on the sidewalk. And that's the distant shot again, where you can see easel 3 is just beyond 2. And that's the mark at easel number 4 on the sidewalk. And you can see easel number 4 was the farthest one.
In what general direction were the suspected ricochet marks?
I placed my easels so they were at a right angle with the ricochet marks. So as you're standing here looking at them, the marks would probably line up from the point where I was standing.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Hawthorne?
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing good.
When you went to Cloud 9, it was the daytime, correct?
Yes.
And the easels that had been there the night before in the parking lot where the casings had been located were gone.
That's correct.
Did you have any type of diagram of the location of those casings when you were doing what you were doing at Cloud 9?
No, I did not.
Okay. When you use the trajectory rods, did you use laser lights and or tape or string to run a point of beginning?
No, I did not.
You had measurements along the wall.
Yes.
Okay. The lower hole in, I think it was the southeast
Yes,
corner?
it's the south face of the southeast corner.
Okay. That was, you said 3 inches above the ground?
Approximately 3 inches, yes.
And that was the hole that you wound up having to dig, and you pulled out the fragments that we just saw admitted, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. You don't do any ballistics determinations in your work, do you?
No, I do not.
Okay. You just gather the evidence, correct?
Correct.
And you document it,
Yes.
Okay. The second hole, which was higher, was, I think you said 12 inches above the ground?
Yes, I believe it was about 12 inches high.
Did you measure the hole on the other side?
I couldn't get to the hole on the other side. As the rod came through, the piece of metal that was on the front of the building, the exit hole was behind that metal, and I had no way of accurately measuring that.
The photograph that we saw, and let me go. The photographs are the same.
Correct, they should all be in the binder.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's first, get this right here. 32F. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, this is the southeast corner of the building, looking at the panel where the entrance holes are.
And there's no markers on those holes in this photograph?
Correct.
Okay, it's just how you see it when you're standing there
Yes.
photographing it. All right. And now, did you take a photograph using a tape from the ground to the height of the hole?
No, I didn't take a photograph. I measured it and documented that.
Okay. And second, 32J, can you tell us what that is?
Yes, that's a photograph looking at the trajectory rod as it entered on the south side of the building, and you can see the tip of the rod coming out on the face of the building.
Did you take a photograph from would it be the east side of the building? The east going south?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay. So you would have been looking at the parking lot from the front of the building to capture this side of the rod?
I don't know if I got the parking lot in it. I got the rod exiting. I don't recall exactly which photograph I took,
Okay. And it's one of this group?
I believe.
Okay. Did you measure from the ground to the entry hole?
Yes.
All right. Did you measure from the ground to the exit hole?
No, I don't believe I did, because the exit hole, I couldn't, like I said before, I couldn't see where it exited. It was behind the panel. The rod came out like this, so it exited the building someplace back here.
Were you able to determine the height of that projectile when it came through the building, when it exited the building?
No.
Were you able to make any determination about how far it traveled?
No.
Now, the strike marks that you found on the ground in front of the club, were you able to determine, you assessed directionality, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to assess from which direction the projectiles were coming from? Or
No.
were you able to?
No.
So they could have been coming from the other direction, hitting the ground?
Possibly.
Okay. We just saw it from your perspective, which was from the southeast part of the building
Yes.
out towards Pine, diagonally out towards the front of the building.
From the parking lot area
Yes.
toward Pine, yes.
Now, did you make any diagrams?
I did.
And in your diagram, do you document the markers?
Yes.
And does your diagram include the other markers that were placed the night before?
I wasn't there the night before, so I don't know where any of the markers were, so I couldn't have done that.
Were you, sometimes when secondary crime scene technicians come out to a scene. They have access to the primary crime scene technician's notes and information that they collected previously. Was that provided to you in order for you to complete your assignment?
No,
And did you receive any information as to when these holes were made in the building?
no,
Or the strike marks, for that matter?
no,
Or the fragments when they actually arrived inside the building?
no,
And like I think you already said that you don't do that type of ballistics analysis.
correct.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt.
Mr. Bankowitz.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Now, these fragments that you found, you can't tell how long they were there or whether they even came from this incident, can you?
No,
And as far as the strike marks, I believe you said they were possible ricochet marks. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So you can't say within any degree of certainty that they are actually ricochet marks from a projectile, can you?
No, I cannot.
Thank you.
Mr. Gorley.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Schmidt, give me a second to review the photos. Officer Schmidt, you would agree with me, ideally in the perfect world, right after the incident, you would have been there to photograph the scene, correct?
If I were working, yes.
Right, because that would have been accurate at the exact same time, correct?
Well,
That
as
it
close
occurred.
to possible was,
Right.
yes.
I understand logistics of not being able to be there, it's dark, and everything else. But you would agree with me, would you not, that the photographs taken 14 hours later may have not accurately portrayed what occurred earlier, because we don't know what happened during that 14-hour scene, correct? Time
Correct.
span.
Okay.
And do you know if, from the time that the police initially got there until the time that you arrived, I believe you said it was 2:30?
Yes,
Okay, so
about 2:30.
okay, 12 to 13, 14 possibly hours later, the scene where everything was preserved in any way?
I believe it was.
So there was somebody there all night?
I can't say that for certain.
Okay.
I don't recall.
It was roped or cordoned off, and somebody was making sure that nobody entered into that area?
I don't know.
Because initially, when I saw your photographs, I didn't see any police tape or any other officers that were there that you would have relieved.
Well, I wouldn't relieve the officers. I'm not a sworn deputy.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. When you got there, was there any other deputies there that weren't involved with you?
There were other people there. I don't recall who they were.
Were they Marion County Sheriff's officers, or were they other people?
I believe they were sheriff's offices.
And do you know how long they'd been there?
No, I do not.
Now, I have seen evidence tech vehicles, vans there typically are. Is that what you arrived at the scene in?
Yes,
And I observed in the parking lot in some of your photographs that there were cars, I believe a car and a truck. Do you know whose vehicles those were?
no, I do not.
Do you know how long they'd been there or why they were there?
No,
Okay. You would agree with me, would you not, that if there was a photograph of an empty parking lot the night before and that there were two cars in your photograph, that those cars came into that area at some time between the time the photos were taken and the time that you took your photos, correct?
yes, if the parking lot were empty, I don't know if it was.
Okay. Under that assumption that there's that it was empty the night before, now there's two cars, they had to get there somehow, they didn't fall from the
Yes.
sky, right?
Right,
Okay.
right.
All right. Now, the marks that you documented, and I'm going to show you, for the record, what is State's Exhibit S18. And it is easel number 4, and it is, according to you, what you believe to be a ricochet mark. Is this, remember taking this photograph?
Yes,
Okay. Now, what I notice about this photograph is there appear to be two black tar-looking things, correct?
yes,
Okay. And in this photograph that you have, it appears that the mark is down and then the black tar-looking things is over the top of that. Is that correct?
the mark is down and
Well,
the tar is over it.
you have the ricochet going this way, and then you have this thing coming into the white of where the ricochet looks like it was. And you can almost see something underneath there that is a different color too.
Well, I really can't interpret what it is. What I see here is a mark in the sidewalk.
Okay, with two black spots next to it.
Yes,
Okay. And do you know what those black spots were?
no,
Did you take any scrapings or anything else to determine what they were?
no,
Didn't appear to be blood, or you would have, correct?
right.
Okay. Now, when you did your trajectory rod through hole number 1, did it appear to be going up or did it appear to be going down?
It appeared to go slightly upward.
And how far off the ground was it?
It entered at about 12 inches.
Okay. So with that assumption that it entered at 12 inches, the individual that is, if it is in fact a trajectory in a bullet hole, the individual would have had to have operated the gun from 12 inches below or shooting in an upward direction, correct?
From the entrance of the hole, yes. But I don't know what the elevation of the parking lot is compared to the corner of the building, if it,
I'm understanding and it may be a poor question, and I apologize for that. But if I understand what you're telling me is that if you believe the bullet entered that way and continued in that direction and went upward, the only way under physics for that to happen would be for the bullet to be coming in a somewhat upward angle from 12 inches off the ground.
Captain, it calls for the proper opinion.
The physics part of it does, so I'll sustain the objection.
From the direction that the rod was and the direction that the first hole was, it would take the person that was making that hole to, if it is an object, a bullet, to be able to shoot it in an upward angle, for the trajectory rod to go upward.
correct.
Okay. And the other trajectory, was it a downward angle?
I couldn't find the point where it struck inside because we didn't have access to it, so I don't know. The only thing I can tell you is that where it entered and that fragments were inside.
Is it potentially possible that those fragments could have been from the first entry? Well,
I would assume it's potentially possible. It's unlikely.
they're going through two steel things. Would you expect a bullet to fragment? Obviously, the other one did. But would you expect a bullet to fragment it entering through those steel things?
It could fragment somewhat, but because there was an exit hole, I would think it would have carried on through.
And also, I'd like to show you, it's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 3. Okay, and you took this picture and it just shows us the southeast corner, correct?
Yes,
Okay. This appears to be a security camera. Is that what you observed to be there?
it looks like it could be.
You weren't involved in trying to collect any of the security tape, I take it?
No.
Do you have or have you ever taken any photographs of Cloud9 previously? That areas that you showed today?
I don't believe so.
So without that previous, we have no way of knowing when those marks were made, correct?
Correct.
It could have been made a year ago, 2 years ago. Those holes could have been made a long time ago.
Possibly.
Those scrape marks could have been made any time from the time it opened until the time that you got there and photographed it, correct?
Possibly.
Okay. How many evidence technicians are there working for the sheriff's office?
Right now, we have 6.
Okay. Back in 2015, September 13th, 14th?
We had 6 at that time.
And how many DNA techs did you have?
2.
And how many supervisors?
Objection as to relevance.
Overrule.
How many supervisors?
2 supervisors.
Thank you.
Hey, redirect.
Yes, sir. The record reflects that the defense was marked as State's Exhibit BV. I'd like you to take a look at what's marked as State's Exhibit BV.
Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's a photograph of the southeast corner of the building with the trajectory rod going through.
That shows the entrance and the exit.
Yes, it does.
Does this fairly and accurately depict how it appeared on September 14, 2015?
Yes.
This time the state removed State's Exhibit BV. The evidence says State's Exhibit 34, I believe.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right. State's Exhibit VV for identification will be received in evidence as State's Exhibit 34.
Can I publish the jury?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Schmidt, just to clarify,
On direct or cross-examination by Mr. Gorley, he referenced you being there 12 hours after. You were there on September 14th, correct?
Yes.
And if the incident, and you were there about 2 in the afternoon?
Yes.
So if the incident occurred on September 13th at about 1 or 2 in the morning, you were actually there about 36 hours later.
Yes.
Okay. And then the photograph I've shown you, at what direction is the trajectory rod going?
Direction.
and not north, south, east, west, like what kind of angle? Is it straight up, straight down?
Oh, it's pretty much horizontal. It's slightly higher in the front of the building, but not much of an angle.
And you would agree the most that a trajectory rod can tell you when it connects 2 points is that a projectile would have traveled the path that exists between those 2 points.
Yes.
What a projectile did prior to, can a projectile striking an object alter its trajectory
Yes, it can.
dramatically at times?
At times, yes, it can.
And there's really no way to predict what change in trajectory will occur when a projectile hits an object, is there?
No.
And it would be entirely, so just because the trajectory rod points down toward the parking lot does not mean that the projectile was fired from the ground.
Correct.
So it could have been fired from a higher angle, hit the side of the building, redirected upward.
Yes.
Objection, speculation.
She's answered it, and so I'm going to overrule the objection.
I have no further questions.
Recross.
did not remove the panels from the side of the building when you were there examining it with the trajectory rods. Is that my understanding?
That's correct.
Okay. And your photograph was taken from an upright position?
Which photograph?
The photograph I think we were just talking about.
Okay.
Photograph 34, which is the one, yeah, that's the one we were just
Right.
talking about.
Right.
And photograph 32J was in the composite of photographs. And now,
Okay. They're both taken, this one was taken from down about the level where the rod goes through.
and that's photograph 34.
Yes.
Okay, so would you have been like on one knee or crouching down when you took that photograph?
Somehow. Down.
Okay.
Probably not, might have been sitting on the sidewalk.
When you inserted the trajectory rod into the building, was there movement up and down when you placed the rod?
When I place the rod, I have to probe, so to speak. I gently probe to find where it will slide through.
Okay. And based on this photograph, there's no corresponding hole in the metal fascia on the building on the opposite side of the corner.
No.
Okay. It comes out in a seam, like the seam on the metal fascia? The rod comes out?
No, this piece of metal is out farther from the face of the building. I don't know what exactly is behind that metal, but the rod exits somewhere back in here, behind that metal plate.
Could it have hit the metal plate and remained inside, like the other fragment that you dug out on the ground?
I would suppose it's possible, but with the hole going straight through, it didn't seem likely.
Did you take a picture of the exit hole?
I couldn't see it.
The rod, you didn't take it from the angle?
No. No, because I could not see anything behind there.
But the rod is coming out from behind there, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Did you station yourself from the exit portion of the rod and attempt to photograph the exiting side of the rod?
No, I did not.
You did not videotape this process, did you?
No.
Thank you, ma'am.
Nothing additional, Judge.
Mr. Gorley?
Yes, sir. Ballpark, how many pictures did you take that day? I can see by your eyes, it's a number, correct?
Now look on my report.
Sure, absolutely.
Uh, 38.
And in those 38 pictures that you took, there's not one picture of the front of the club with the trajectory rod going to the back side corner?
I don't believe there is.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I did believe I heard your testimony on either cross-examination by one of the other attorneys that you can't tell whether the bullet initiated from the front or the side back of the club or came from the front going downward, correct?
I can't determine that. It appears from the way the metal is on the holes at pointers A and B, they're bent inward, so
But
you
you
would...
can't say for sure, correct? You're not
In
an
my
expert.
experience, I would say that was entry.
Would you agree with me or not that that probably should have been a picture that you should have taken?
Yes, I would agree with you.
All right. And I apologize, my math was wrong in calculating the number of hours from the crime scene until you got there. It was actually a day and almost a day and a half, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in that same scenario, there was lots of times for other people, if the crime scene was not preserved, to have access to those areas, correct? Okay. Now, when you pulled away the metal sheeting to try to locate the other bullet, it appeared from the photographs in your testimony that the ground was dirt. Is that correct?
There was dirt behind,
Okay.
yeah, behind
And
the
I see
panel.
from your scratch marks, or that you said that it was where you dug up the second casing or bullet fragments.
The fragments, yes.
Okay. Prior to digging that up, did you observe any ricochet marks in any way in that surface,
In what surface?
in the ground?
In the ground by the,
Where the second hole, where you recovered the fragments from the second?
well, I couldn't see in there.
Okay.
I didn't see any on the ground just out, next to that panel. And when I pulled the panel out, basically the panel was pulled out and I had to reach my hand in and pull it out like this. I couldn't see anything back in there. We could not get the panel pulled all the way out.
Would it be fair to say that the ground in there was soft?
No, I wouldn't say it was soft. The dirt that I scraped out was loose. There was what I think was maybe some wood framing, some type of framing back in there.
Okay. Now, there was no resistance in the trajectory rod of the first hole to the second hole, correct? When you
In-
put it through?
In hole A, you're
Hole
talking
one,
about?
or the first hole, the one that's up higher, the 12-inch hole.
This one that's up higher?
Yeah.
No, like I said, I just had to probe to find the exit.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, is the witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor. Should remain on standby for the direction.
All right, thank you, ma'am, you can step down. Call your next witness.
Amanda Stratton.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat. Ms. Kipke?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Amanda Stratton. My last name is spelled Stratton.
And how are you employed, Ms. Stratton?
I am currently employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Jacksonville, Florida, in the biology section as a crime laboratory analyst.
And how long have you been a crime laboratory analyst with FDLE?
4 years.
And what are your duties in that position at FDLE?
I obtain items of evidence said to contain possible biological material. I examine them for the possible presence of bodily fluids. I will collect samples and I will perform DNA testing on the samples. And then I will make comparisons of the DNA profiles obtained from items of evidence to DNA profiles from known individuals and report my findings.
Did you have any previous positions with FDLE?
No, I did not.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science from the University of Central Florida, as well as a minor in Chemistry from the University of Central Florida.
And what type of training have you received to enable you to do your job with FDLE?
I was required to complete the training program that is produced at FDLE, and it takes about a year, and it's broken down into a series of modules, and in each module I'm required to perform a laboratory competency and take an oral and written exam. At the end of the culmination of all of the modules together. I have to perform an oral examination in front of my peers and a mock trial in front of my peers and my supervisors. I also have to perform supervised casework under the direction of a qualified laboratory analyst.
How long does supervised casework go on for?
A couple months.
Do you also have ongoing training in your job?
Yes, I do. I'm required to perform continuing education on an annual basis, and we're constantly improving our technology, and so we have to undergo training for any new techniques that are applied in laboratory.
Do you go through proficiency training or testing?
Yes, I do. I have to perform a proficiency test twice a year.
And can you describe to the jury what happens during that proficiency testing?
Sure. A proficiency test is it's like a mock case that is provided to me from an external agency, and I am unaware of the expected results of this case. I have to treat it as if I would regular casework, and then my findings are submitted to the agency for review to see if I obtained the expected results.
And you indicated you go through that annually twice a year?
Twice a year.
And in all of the proficiency testing that you have undergone, have you ever not passed?
No.
Have you previously testified before and permitted to give your opinion regarding forensic DNA testing?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
17 times.
At this time, Your Honor, I would tender the witness for any cross-examination on her qualifications.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
No objection.
No objection.
All right. Yeah, proceed.
Ms. Stratton, what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a long name for a chemical that's found within your body. It's found within your skin cells, your blood, semen, saliva, hair, bone, tissue, teeth. You get half of your DNA from your mother, half of your DNA from your father. No two individuals have the same DNA with the exception of identical twins.
What is forensic DNA testing, what you do in your job?
So forensic just means science as it pertains to the law. So for forensic DNA testing, I'm specifically looking at something called short tandem repeats, which are short segments of DNA that are repeated throughout the body. And I'm looking at these specific locations because these are what makes each of us unique. So we all are born with, 99% of our DNA being the same. So we have 2 arms, 2 legs when we're born, and we have, different characteristics that will display itself. But there is this 1% of DNA, that short tandem repeat DNA, that is unique to each of us, with the exception of identical twins, that I am specifically interested in for forensic DNA testing.
So short tandem repeat, that's the short, how FDLE refers to that is when they refer to STR DNA analysis. Is that correct?
Correct.
What is touch DNA evidence?
Touch DNA is any DNA that is left behind from touching an object, skin cells that would be left behind on that object after handling it.
Okay. In this particular case, did you receive multiple items of evidence to perform DNA analysis from the Marion County Sheriff's Office in reference to a death investigation with an offense date of September 13th, 2015, and the victim, at least one of them, being labeled Benitria Robinson?
Yes, I did.
And did you do analysis on swabs that were identified as being taken from casings, shell
Yes.
casings? Okay.
Yes, I did.
Would these types of swabs be used to recover possible touch DNA, as we just previously talked about?
Yes.
When you receive items of evidence to analyze, are they already designated by the agency that's submitting them to you by some sort of identification?
Yes, they are provided with an agency item number, and then when FDLE receives the exhibits, we give them a unique identification number as well.
So they're renumbered with an FDLE number once you receive them and start working on them, is that correct?
Yes.
Envelopes here, they've already been admitted to evidence. It states 18 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28. I ask you to take a look at all of them and see if you recognize them.
Okay, yes, I do.
Okay, and what do you recognize them to be?
On each one of these items, I can recognize them by the FDLE label, this yellow label that is placed on here. It contains the case information, the case number and the exhibit number that was assigned to it upon receipt at FDLE. It also contains my seal with the evidence tape with my initials and my markings on here as well. And these are touch swabs from shell casings.
All of states 18 through 28 are all the same thing? I mean, they're not all the same thing, but they're the same identified item, swabbings from shell casings, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And did you analyze the contents of states 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28?
Yes, I did.
What do you do with a swab that is sent to you in order to do your DNA analysis?
Upon opening each item of evidence, I examine them individually. I will take a cutting from that swab, and that swab is placed into a tube given the same unique identification number that was assigned to it, and that will go through the DNA testing process until I obtain a DNA profile.
And is that what you did with all of these exhibits laying before you?
Yes.
Were some of those envelopes, did they have multiple swabs inside?
I have to check.
Do you have that notated in one of your reports?
It appears that it's just a single swab in each one of them.
In any of those swabs that you did the DNA analysis of, were you able to get DNA results?
I did not obtain any DNA results with the exception of Exhibit 8. The DNA obtained from Exhibit 8 was very limited, and due to its limited nature, I was not able to make any interpretations about the DNA profile.
Okay. Let's talk about first all the other ones in which you reported getting no results. What does that mean?
No DNA results just means that no DNA was detected or obtained. There's no DNA present on the item.
Okay. And contrast that with limited results as you reported on the one exhibit.
So limited DNA results means there is DNA present, but it's very low quality. There's just not enough information there for me to be able to make any comparisons to it.
Have you, prior to doing the work in this particular case, have you previously analyzed swabbings for DNA that were labeled as coming from casings?
Yes.
Can you estimate approximately how many times you've done that?
I can't give an exact number, but I would say at least 100, at least.
Is it common to not be able to get any results or limited results?
Yes, it's very common.
Why is that?
It is my understanding that the ammunition that is fired through a firearm is exposed to extreme heat within the firearm, and heat can degrade DNA and potentially destroy any DNA that's present.
Ms. Hoffman?
Good morning.
What is an allele?
An allele is, I like to refer to it as a DNA type. As I said about when I described the definition of DNA, you obtain half of your DNA from your mother, half of your DNA from your father. At each one of the 15 locations of interest that I'm interested in, we get one allele or DNA type from our mother and one allele or DNA type from our father. So that is what I would define as allele as.
And you said you have 15 locations.
15 locations that we test.
And is that called loci?
Yes.
Are one of those loci determinative of sex, either female or male?
Yes, one of the the 15 locations plus a gender identification marker.
Okay. And when you ran the sample on number 8, do you have any information in your report about how many loci were identified, even though it was insufficient?
I'd have to check my file. There was information at 5 loci plus the gender identification marker.
And some of the swabs that were made, which was before you got the samples, a swabbing was made of more than one shell casing in those envelopes. Is that correct?
I would imagine so. It was just, some of them were described as a swab from casings.
And on the outside of the envelope, they reference one swab from 3 casings or one swab from 2 casings.
Yes, I'd have to check which exhibit that was, but.
I think it's on the envelopes.
Okay. Yes, there is some that where it was swabbed from multiple casings.
Okay, all right. Now, if an item is fingerprinted, can you get DNA?
If it has been through the fingerprint examination process?
Yes.
It depends.
How if you use the black powder to raise the prints and then they go ahead and do the swabs, are you able to get DNA that way?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How about an anhydrous fuming?
I think it depends. It depends on how much heat has been exposed to. There are other variables that can affect my ability to obtain a DNA profile other than just latent print examination.
You would not be able to tell if either of those factors contributed to those items not having sufficient sufficient ingredients in it to test, right?
I'm not sure that I
Bad
understand
question.
what you're asking.
No, I'll do it. All right. You wouldn't know if either of those in those types of analysis, the black powder or the anhydrous, would have affected those samples.
No.
Okay. It may have been heat, correct?
Sure.
And it may have been that no DNA was ever on those cartridge casings.
Correct.
Okay. And from all of these items that you received swabs from, there was no DNA that you could develop from these samples?
With the exception of Exhibit 8, which was limited and not interpretable.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bankowitz.
Were you given or provided any known samples?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And from the known samples, you were not able to make any identification to those swabs, is that correct?
I examined and made my interpretation regarding these items of evidence before I make any comparisons, and I determined that none of them were, Exhibit 8 with the limited information that was there was not interpretable, which means I would not make any comparisons.
So you never made any, even attempted to make comparisons because everything that you had there was, for the lack of a better term, inconclusive?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Ms. Stratton, there are ways to amplify DNA, correct?
Yes.
Okay, could you explain to the jury what amplifying DNA and the name of the test that is used for that?
Yes. The amplification step in the DNA testing process is called PCR. It stands for polymerase chain reaction. It's essentially like a biological Xerox machine where I'm making millions and millions of copies of the DNA so that I can actually separate the DNA fragments for to generate a DNA profile that I can observe.
It would be used where there's a small sample and to multiply the same thing many, many, many times over, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that test performed on any of the samples that you had in this case?
Yes, it was performed on all of these.
Okay. Now, one of the envelopes that you observed had multiple casings and one swab, correct? One swab for multiple casings.
Yes.
Now, you would agree with me, would you not, that that's probably a bad idea?
I'm not really sure.
To swab multiple pieces of evidence for the same and only submit one DNA?
I have done it before. If I received multiple casings in the same package where they're all touching each other, I have swabbed them together with one swab.
And underlining all touching each other, and the reason that you would do the one swab is because they may have contaminated each other, correct?
Yes.
All right. And in the multiple casings, we do not want a casing that potentially has DNA on it touching another casing that potentially has different DNA on it, because then the swab would be contaminated, correct?
It's possible.
And that is why the majority of those have one casing, one swab, correct?
I believe most of them have just one casing.
Okay. Preferably, would you agree with me that that would be the better procedure? One swab per casing?
I really have no opinion either way on
Protect
that.
against contamination?
Well,
Seem reasonable.
yeah, and if you're trying to prevent contamination, then yes.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Ms. Stratton, you talked about the one, and heard about the one exhibit in which was not interpretable by you because of the lack of information received in Exhibit A, correct?
Yes.
But you did mention that you got some information about on the gender marker?
Yes, I did get some information, but it's not enough for me to determine whether or not it's a male, coming from a male or a female individual.
Why is that?
It's just so limited. So men have an X and a Y chromosome. Women have two X's, but I only obtained one X at the gender identification marker. It's just not enough for me to say if it's male or female.
And Mr. Gorley was just talking to you about contamination. In some of your DNA analysis, do you often do analysis on what are DNA mixtures?
Yes, I do.
And can you explain to the jury what you do in that situation?
A DNA mixture is just essentially DNA profiles that are combined, or it's a mixture of more than one individual's DNA profiles. And we have procedures in place that allow us to possibly determine if one person's DNA profile is more present in that overall profile than the other person.
So you have analyzed, done DNA analysis and resolved more than one person was a contributor to a certain DNA sample.
Yes.
Recross?
Nothing further.
No, Your Honor.
Just briefly.
Yes, sir.
You guys have, when I say you guys, I apologize. The DNA lab has very strict protocol in making sure that your area is sterile, correct?
Yes.
To make sure that if you're testing a piece of DNA from one case, that it doesn't interfere with a piece of DNA from another case. Is that not true?
That's correct.
Could you explain to the jury what steps you go to make sure that you're conducting tests in a sterile environment?
Sure. We have quality control procedures that we use. So, for instance, I have to wear gloves and a mask and a lab coat. Prior to working an item of evidence, I have to decontaminate my laboratory bench. I use bench paper, and I only open up one item of evidence at a time. I also, during the DNA testing process, each sample is, or each case is given a blank, which is also a control that is run in parallel with the samples to monitor the possible presence of any contamination.
And you do all those procedures to make sure that your DNA doesn't contaminate the sample, correct?
That's correct.
Or other cases that you're working on contaminate the current sample that you're working on?
Yes, that monitors sample-to-sample contamination, analyst-to-sample contamination, and environmental contamination.
Thank you.
Anything else? Is the witness excused? And you can step down and go about your business. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a good time in the morning for our mid-morning break. So if you'll kindly close your pads, leave them on your chairs. Please remember my repeated admonishments not to begin discussing the case. This will be about 15 minutes.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, ma'am. Mr. McCord?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is,
Spell your name.
sure. My name is Laura Draga. The last name is spelled D-R-A-G-A.
Where do you work?
I work in the firearms section at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Jacksonville.
What is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is a two-part agency. One part is primarily interested in the investigation of crimes, and the other part is the forensic side, which is primarily engaged in the analysis of evidence which is submitted to the laboratory.
And you said you work in Jacksonville. What is it that you do?
My official position is a senior crime laboratory analyst in the firearms and tool mark section. My duties are the examination of firearms for function. I do serial number restorations, and I examine fired ammunition components, meaning fired bullets and fired cartridge cases, to determine common origin. And really what that means is I want to see if a particular bullet from a scene is fired from the same firearm as another bullet or fired from a particular firearm, and likewise with a cartridge case. I look to see if individual cartridge cases were fired in the same firearm as other cartridge cases or fired in a particular firearm submitted to the laboratory.
How long have you been a senior crime laboratory analyst?
I was recently promoted as of last month.
And prior to being the senior crime laboratory analyst, what was your title?
Crime laboratory analyst.
How long in total have you been employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Since 2006.
At the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, other than working as a crime laboratory analyst, have you held any other positions?
I was originally hired with the agency as a trainee for a forensic technologist. Prior to completing the training program, I was promoted into the position of crime laboratory analyst trainee. I completed that 18-month training program for crime laboratory analyst position in early 2008.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and in Biology.
And what kind, you mentioned an 18-month training program. Tell the jury about what kind of training you have to do the work that you do.
Well, specific to the area of firearm and tool mark identification, I underwent an 18-month training program under the supervision of an experienced analyst with FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And that training program consisted of both a theoretical and a practical portion. So the theoretical portion involves studying how firearms are manufactured, studying how marks are imparted by a harder object on a softer object, actually going and visiting firearms manufacturers and actually seeing first person how the marks are created on the firearms, which will then be imparted to cartridges that are fired in them. The practical portion consisted both of practical exercises and of supervised casework, meaning real evidence items which I examine, and then another analyst basically co-examines that with me to teach me how to do the casework.
What type of ongoing training have you had while at FDLE?
Both during the training program and after. I've taken a couple courses which are sponsored by the FBI. We have periodic discipline meetings, which is where firearm sections from around the state get together and talk about new developments. I've also attended training with the Association of Firearm Tool Mark Examiners during their annual meeting. A number of other smaller and less important things.
What is proficiency testing?
Proficiency testing is a test where it's like anything else. You're looking to see if the person being given the test can get the correct answer. With respect to firearms identification, proficiency testing is conducted at FDLE by purchasing a test from a company which is called CTS. And CTS markets these tests to multiple agencies in multiple states. And they create the test where there's a known answer, but that answer is not shared with anyone in the agency until after the results are submitted back to CTS. And basically, those tests consist of multiple sets of fired cartridge cases or bullets, depending on which test it is. And the requirement of us is that we are able to associate 1 with 2, 1 with 3, or likewise that we are able to say 2 is not the same as 1 or 2 is not the same as 3. And then we submit those results back, and we're effectively graded. And in order to continue with casework, I'm required to pass a proficiency on an annual basis with FDLE.
And you have always done that?
Yes, since 2008, I have passed all of my proficiencies.
Have you ever testified in court before as an expert?
Yes, I have.
In what fields?
In firearms and firearms identification, and in distance determination.
Okay. Approximately how many times?
Over 110 times in state circuit court.
At this time, I would tender the witness for cross-examination regarding her competence.
No objection.
No questions.
No questions, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
How, can you tell the jury how a semi-automatic firearm functions?
Well, a semi-automatic firearm, first of all, is one that uses some of the energy of firing a cartridge to work the moving parts of the firearm. So any firearm, whether it's a semi-automatic or not, you have to have a cartridge or all of the units which are contained within a cartridge loaded separately into a firearm. And those components, by the way, are a bullet, powder, a case, and a primer. So when the cartridge is fired, the firing pin strikes the primer. The primer contains a small amount of priming compound, which is an explosive. When it is crushed, it ignites the gunpowder from that small explosion. And then when the gunpowder begins to burn, it produces a large amount of gas and drives the bullet down the barrel. So when that gas is expanding, there's energy associated with that rapid expansion. And if you can imagine, most people are familiar with, reaction, opposite reaction, or action-reaction, some people call it. So if you're pushing outward on a cartridge case, which is contained within the chamber of a firearm, and you're pushing forward on the base of the bullet, you're also pushing backward on the back of the cartridge case. So that backward force can be harnessed to work the moving parts of a firearm. So a semi-automatic firearm will have, in almost all cases, a magazine. And the magazine contains multiple cartridges. And so you can have magazines which you can remove, you can have magazines which are an integral part of the firearm, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of discussing what a semi-automatic firearm is. Some of that backward force is harnessed to move the breech block, extract a cartridge case from the chamber after it is fired, and then as it moves forward under spring pressure, we'll load another cartridge into the firearm, and it is ready to be fired again. So with a manually operated firearm, you have to move a lever, a bolt, some other part of the firearm. You have to actually physically grab it and move it. Whereas with a semi-automatic firearm, when you pull the trigger, it fires the cartridge in the chamber, extracts and ejects the cartridge case, and then loads a new cartridge into the chamber where you can pull the trigger again and fire the firearm.
And when shell casings are ejected from the firearm, what direction do they travel from the firearm?
Well, it depends on the style of firearm. Some firearms have an ejector at roughly a 9 o'clock position, extractor at roughly a 3 o'clock position. Those firearms generally eject to the right. Some firearms have an ejector at the 12 o'clock position, extractor at the 3 o'clock position. Those firearms also generally eject to the right. Some firearms are designed with an extractor at the 12 o'clock position. Those firearms generally eject straight up. Occasionally, even though firearms are designed to eject to the right, for whatever reason, the cartridge cases fall straight down, or sometimes I've even seen them roll over slightly to the left. But generally speaking, most semi-automatic pistols, most semi-automatic rifles eject generally to the right, but there's some exceptions to that rule.
Is there any way to tell how far a shell casing will eject from a firearm?
To tell how far a cartridge case is ejected from a firearm, you can do repeated testing with a specific firearm if you have it, and based on where those cartridge cases land during testing, you can get some idea with respect to a specific firearm and ammunition combination. But if you change the angle of the way that the firearm is held, then that will change the location of where they land. So any testing with regards to ejection pattern, which is how far and where do cartridge cases go after they're fired, is dependent upon a lot of variables, the primary of which is the way that you're actually holding the firearm to begin with.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago the kind of the components of a cartridge. You mentioned there being bullets, primer, the casing, correct?
Yes, and powder.
And what is a jacket or jacketing?
A jacket?
Yes.
A jacket is a term that we use to talk about a part of a bullet. So what you'll see with a lot of modern ammunition is that the bullets are jacketed. And basically what that means is that you have a softer lead core. We use lead because it's very dense. So when you have a projectile, which you're expelling from a firearm, you want that to be relatively heavy so that when it hits, it transfers that mass and that energy. But the jacket can be made of multiple different materials, the most common of which is a brass alloy, which looks like copper. So we usually talk about it and we say it's a copper jacket. And it's actually a metal, not coating, but metal almost sheet or covering that covers the lead alloy core. And the purpose of that is multi-fold. Number one, it reduces lead fouling in the barrel. Lead fouling in the barrel can lead to inaccuracy and decreased efficiency of operation. And the other reason is for increased weight retention. If you have a jacketed bullet, generally you're going to see less fragmentation until you get to jacketed hollow points, in which case the primary reason for the jacket is just to reduce lead fouling.
I'd like to go ahead now and hand you several exhibits that have been in evidence. Starting with State's Exhibit 14, 15, 7, 8, and 33. And can you go ahead and just take a look at each of those items and let me know when you're done?
You ready?
Yes. Do you recognize those items?
I do.
What are they?
State's Exhibit 7 contains a fired metal jacketed bullet. It is 38 caliber class. State's Exhibit 8 also contains a fired metal jacketed bullet, also 38 caliber class. State's Exhibit 14 contains 13 fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases. State's Exhibit 61, I'm sorry, State's Exhibit 15, which is my Exhibit 61, contains 8 fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases. And State's Exhibit 33 contains a large number of fragments. I can go through exactly what those all are if you want me to, but they're all bullet fragments except for 2.
Now, you reference States 7 and 8 as containing projectiles of a 38 caliber class.
Yes.
Can those be fired in a 9mm pistol?
Yeah, when we say 38 caliber class, that's the U.S. version of a metric 9mm. So things which are 38 caliber class are anywhere from 355 to 362 thousandths of an inch across. So when I say 38 caliber class, it means that I've measured it and either the average diameter or the approximate diameter is about 355 thousandths.
When did you receive those items for comparison?
These items were submitted late last month for comparison.
Now, who is Christopher Rischel?
Christopher Rischel is my coworker. He is a crime laboratory analyst in the firearms and tool mark section.
Had these items been submitted for analysis by Mr. Rischel in October of 2015?
I don't recall the date.
September, October 2015.
Yes, Chris authored a number of reports, the first of which was October of 2015.
And was Mr. Rischel unavailable this week?
Yes, he is not available for testimony this week.
Were the items, to your knowledge, submitted to you so that you could rework them and be present and provide testimony regarding them?
Yes.
Were you at all involved with Mr. Rischel's prior examination of these items?
Yes, I was.
In what fashion?
Whenever, and if you don't mind, I'd like to take a couple steps back.
Certainly.
With regards to the examination of the evidence, we take notes about what we have, any measurements that we can make about the items, and then depending on what we have, we'll determine on what comparisons we do. So there are a number of different conclusions that we can come to based on what our opinion is of common origin. So the range of conclusions that we can come to are that we believe that 2 items or more were fired in the same firearm. We see some correspondence of markings on the items to indicate that they may have been fired in the same firearm, but not enough for identification. We see no difference or similarities that are significant, so we can't tell you whether or not, or we see some differences but not enough to indicate that they were fired in the same firearm, or we see significant differences indicating that they were fired in two different firearms. For all opinions of identification in our laboratory, we are required to have a second examiner look at all of the items which we are identifying. And they must come to the same conclusion in order to have the file pass a technical review. So with respect to this case, my responsibility was that I was the second examiner looking at the case, but only with regards to any items that were identified. And not all of the items were identified. So, for example, I did have occasion to look at some of the exhibits, which I re-examined, but not all of them.
Now, how do you go about conducting a firearms examination with fired components, with shell casings, jacketing, projectiles?
Would you like to start with cartridge cases or bullets?
Start with cartridge cases.
Cartridge cases. Sure. So there's a standard operating procedure with regards to the examination of fired cartridge cases. And, you know, there's things like inventory, taking notes on how many we have. But with regards to the important information about the type of firearm that may have fired it and what we're going to compare, we look for class characteristics. And this is also true with respect to bullets. But class characteristics of a fired cartridge case are, first of all, the caliber, the type of breech face marks, the type of firing pin impression, and then the marks within that impression. And then we also look for other things like the presence or absence of extractor and ejector marks, a mark which we call firing pin aperture shear, which is basically the hole through the breech face, which is the firing pin aperture, may scrape a little bit against the cartridge case. That's what firing pin aperture shear is. And the presence or absence of firing pin drag. All of these things are class characteristics. And so you can kind of liken it to other things. If you have something which is, you know, 4 and you're looking for something which is 3, then, you know, it's not the same. You wouldn't compare a 4 to a 3. So likewise, if you have something which has parallel breech face marks, which is marks which are coming from impacting with the breech face of the firearm, that's the supporting portion of the firearm behind the cartridge case at time of firing, then you wouldn't compare it to something, you wouldn't compare something with parallel breech face marks to something with circular breech face marks, or something with crosshatch breech face marks. And if you have an elliptical firing pin impression, you don't compare that to something with a hemispherical firing pin impression, because they cannot have been, the marks cannot have been created by the same item. They are different. But we do compare things of like class characteristics to see if the individual characteristics or the particular pattern of the marks, in other words, we're beyond, is it parallel, but now we're down to, is there a deep skinny line, is there a wide, you know, shallow line, is the next stria, you know, farther away or closer. So we're actually looking at that individual pattern, that pattern which is unique to the firearm that fired it. And so after determining what the class characteristics are and grouping them by class characteristics, you proceed with the microscopic comparison of individual characteristics. In our laboratory, that is conducted with the use of a comparison microscope. The comparison microscope has 2 separate stages, or a place to mount the items, and 2 separate sets of optics. And those separate sets of optics are connected by an optical bridge, which is basically a prism. And what that allows me to do is that allows me to overlap the images so that I can directly compare different areas on the cartridge case of, you know, one exhibit to another cartridge case. And if I am able to observe a sufficient correspondence of that pattern, then I can come to the opinion of identification. Likewise, I can come to any of those other range of conclusions depending on what I have. If I don't have sufficient correspondence, I'm not required to identify it. Likewise, if I don't have sufficient differences, I'm not required to eliminate it. That sufficiency is going to determine what my opinion is.
So starting off with, start with State's Exhibit 14. That item contains 13 9mm shell casings, is that correct?
Yes, I mean, obviously I haven't checked to see that they're all in there, but at the time I examined it, it did.
If you'd like to open it up and,
For the purposes of the argument, I think it's safe to assume that they're probably all still in there.
those shell casings, do you have an opinion as to whether they were fired from the same firearm?
Yes.
What is your opinion?
In my opinion, all of the cartridge cases, which was 13, in State's Exhibit 14, were fired in a single firearm.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 15. I'll open this one up for you. This one contains, is it 8 separate shell casings?
Yes.
And those shell casings are from a different manufacturer than the shell casings in Exhibit 14. Is that correct?
I don't recall the particular head stamps, but if you give me a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. The head stamp for State's Exhibit 14 is FC, which indicates that it was either made by or made for Federal, which is a manufacturer of cartridges.
Now, the packages I've set out before you from State's Exhibit 15, are those numbered A through F, or lettered A through F?
Yes.
I would like you to go ahead and start with the casings contained in B and C. How many casings are contained in those two packages?
B contains 2 fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases, and C also contains 2 additional fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases.
And does the packaging of those items contain easel numbers on them?
Yes.
And what are the easel numbers written on those packages?
B corresponds to easel 7. C corresponds to easel 8.
Do you have an opinion as to whether those cartridge cases were fired from the same firearm?
The 4 cartridge cases from B and C, in my opinion, were all fired from a single firearm.
And is that firearm different than the firearm that fired the cartridge casings contained in State's Exhibit 14?
Correct.
And now looking at casings in bags A, D, E, and F. How many casings are contained in each of those bags?
Each of these envelopes contains 1 fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases for a total of 4.
Do you have an opinion as to whether they were fired from the same firearm?
In my opinion, the cartridge cases in A, D, E, and F were all fired in 1 single firearm.
And is that firearm different than the firearm that fired the cartridge casings in B and C?
Correct.
And is that still different from the other firearm that fired the 13 casings?
Correct.
So in your opinion, there were 3 separate firearms that fired the shell casings you examined?
Correct.
And these are all 9mm casings?
Correct.
I'd like you to go ahead and take a look at State's Exhibit 33. Can you open that up for me?
Would you like me to open this? No?
Is that a smaller bag contained?
There are smaller bags in here which separate each of the individual items.
Go ahead and just keep it contained in that bag at the time being. Can you describe for the jury the individual items contained in that smaller bag? Would it help you to open it?
No, it's okay. If we need to later, we can.
Let's go ahead and just so we can, if we need to.
Let's go ahead and start with 86G.
Did you reach any conclusions when you looked at that item?
Yes.
Okay, and describe 86G for the jury and tell them what your conclusion was.
86G contains two non-metallic fragments. One of them appears to be a piece of concrete. The other, not sure what it is. But they're not parts of a bullet.
And now, if you could look at 86A, B, and F. Describe those for the jury.
86A contains 9 lead alloy fragments. 86B contains part of a bullet fragment, which means that there's a lead alloy portion and part of a jacket adhering. And 86F contains a small jacket fragment.
Were any of those of value for identification?
No.
What is 86C?
86C is a fired metal jacket fragment.
How do you, how is a jacket fragment of value for identification?
Well, as I was talking about earlier, what a jacket is it's a thin metal portion on the outside of a softer core. And so if you can imagine that as a bullet is actually traveling through on the inside of a barrel, the jacket is the portion that is touching the barrel. So if I want to compare marks, which are left on the bullet by the barrel, then the marks that I'm going to be looking for are going to be on the jacket. So when I go to do a microscopic comparison of the stria left on the bullet, then I'm going to compare the landing groove engravings, which are on the jacket portion.
And now, if you can go ahead and take a look at exhibits 90 and 91.
I'm sorry, you're not.
Sure.
State's Exhibits 7 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
And those, I believe, you previously described as being bullets.
Correct.
What type of bullets are they?
They are jacketed hollow point bullets, meaning that the jacket does not cover the nose portion of the bullet. The nose is the forward portion of the bullet. And they have a hollow cavity in the nose. So the jacket is scored at the nose portion so that when it strikes an object, it is designed to mushroom. In other words, it is designed that the front portion should distort backward and that the jacket petals should peel back.
What is the purpose of hollow point bullets? What function do they serve?
By expanding, you actually change the diameter of the item that is traveling. So if you have a FMJ, or some people know them as a ball style bullet, what you see sometimes is that that bullet will travel through an object for a greater distance than an object with a greater diameter. So if you have a bullet which is designed to expand, then the bullet won't necessarily travel as far through an object, and since the purpose of a bullet striking an object is to transfer the kinetic energy, the movement energy, to an object that it strikes, you want as much of that energy to be transferred to what you're hitting as possible. So for that purpose, the jacketed hollow points are designed to expand, give a greater diameter, so that they transfer more of that energy to the target.
In the way that a bullet becomes of value for comparison, is it like a jacket, the way it travels down the barrel of the firearm?
Right. On the inside of the barrel of most modern firearms, with the exception being shotguns, there is rifling. And rifling is a set of helical grooves where material is actually removed from the inside of the barrel with tooling. And the reason for them being helical grooves is that it actually bites onto the bullet a little bit and causes it to start to rotate. And that spin of a traveling bullet gives it gyroscopical stability, much like a spinning football will travel farther because it's traveling straighter and not tumbling. A spinning bullet will also travel farther and straighter. So those helical grooves and the points which are closest to the center we call lands, and the points which are farther away from the center we call grooves, interact with the bullet to make it spin, but as they are doing so, the bullet is actually being pushed through the barrel against those surfaces. So as you're having this bullet travel through, then it leaves striations or scratches on the surface of the bullet. With respect to the land and the groove engravings, there are specific measurements which are associated with those. You can measure how wide the land is relative to the groove, and beyond that, how many lands and grooves do you have? And those end up being the class characteristics of a fired bullet when combined with the caliber.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the metal jacket in 86C and the projectiles in exhibits, I think marked as
7 and 8.
Exhibit 9091, our exhibits 7 and 8, whether they came from the same firearm?
Yes.
What is your opinion?
With respect to the two bullets in exhibits 7, States Exhibits 7 and 8, and what I have designated as Exhibit 86C from States Exhibit 33, which is a fired metal jacket, it is my opinion that all three of these items were fired from a single firearm based on a sufficient correspondence of individual characteristics between those three items. In other words, the pattern of markings is so similar that that I believe that they were fired from the same firearm.
And again, the caliber of those projectiles you described as a .38 caliber class, which is consistent with being fired from a 9mm?
Yeah, the bullet weight, obviously Exhibit 86C doesn't have its remaining core, but the bullet weight on exhibits, States Exhibits 7 and 8, is about 115 grains, which is consistent with the types of bullets normally loaded to 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases.
In the exhibits, I believe it's going to be 14 and 15, those are all Luger 9mm caliber cartridge casings.
Yes.
And lastly, I'd like you to look at, in the exhibit with the several small packages, the remaining exhibits, which should be 86D and E. What are those?
Exhibits 86D and E are also fired metal jacket fragments.
Do you have, were they of any value for comparison?
86D may be a value for comparison. 86E is not. I don't know how much the jury can see from where they are, but it's really rather a small fragment, and there's not very much remaining of the rifling, and what is there is damaged and distorted. So 86E is not of value for identification to any firearm.
Okay. And what about 86D?
86D does bear some intact rifling, and it may be suitable for comparison.
Was that fragment fired from the same firearm that fired the two projectiles in the jacket?
No, and even though 86E is of no value for identification, it does have measurable land and groove engravings, and the measurements of those land and groove engravings on both 86D and E are consistent with each other. They are inconsistent with States Exhibit 7, 8, and 86C from States Exhibit 33.
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes. Cross-examination. Ms. Hawthorne.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Before you put those away,
Sure.
let's take a look at,
I'm just going to organize a little bit.
okay. Let's start with 86C. All right. And 7 and 8. All right. Those two items, 7 and 8 are casings?
No, 7 and 8 are bullets. Projectiles, if you would.
Okay. And this was a fragment that came in another exhibit?
Correct.
Okay. And how were you able to make the identification between 7 and 8 and 86C?
That identification is based on the microscopic comparison of the items using, and if you'll pardon me, I believe it's States Exhibit 7 as a reference. Exhibit 90 was compared with Exhibit 91, and then Exhibit 90 was compared with Exhibit 86C from State's Exhibit 33 using a comparison microscope. And so as I mentioned before, one item would be mounted on the one stage, and one item would be mounted on the other stage of the comparison microscope. And what we are looking for, after having already determined that they're of similar class characteristics, is a correspondence of the striations. So we find an individual land engraving, which we perceive to be well marked, which we would expect that that pattern would reproduce on another bullet fired by the same firearm. And we rotate the other bullet around until either we find something of similar pattern or we don't. If we find something of similar pattern, then we rotate both of them in phase, which means, in other words, if we're looking at one land engraving, then we rotate both of them to the next land engraving, and we look for correspondence at that next land engraving. If we observe a correspondence of the striations, which is indicative that they were fired in the same firearm, then we come to the conclusion that they were fired in the same firearm.
Now, item 86C is that the fragment that was mushroom.
Correct.
Okay. And can you share with us the process of how you compared that to the bullets? Did you put
It's
this
the same process.
Under the microscope?
Yes.
Do you take pictures of your comparisons?
I do.
And did you provide any of those to the state?
I did not.
The class characteristics. Many manufacturers can share class characteristics, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In your comparison, did you find any cartridge casings that were submitted matching either of those bullets, or can you do that?
Well, we don't really talk about design specifications as a class characteristic. Are you, and I think what you're asking me, if I can clarify for a moment, is if the class characteristics of any of these fired bullets would be consistent with one manufacturer or the other? Or are you asking me if I can associate the bullets to one firearm and then associate the cartridge cases to one firearm? I'm not sure which question you're asking.
Well, let's start with the general question first, which is class characteristics. And were you did identify class characteristics, did you not?
Yes.
Okay. Once you have class characteristics, which is very general in determining when you're doing your analysis, then you go to a more specific area to try to narrow it down. Would lands and grooves and then aperture shear on a casing or lands and grooves on a bullet be a more specific level of analysis than just making a class characteristic finding?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference in the way that we generally talk about it and the way that you phrased it. So,
Okay.
you know, I don't want to seem
Help me
like
out
I'm,
here.
yeah, I don't want to seem like I'm being overbearing. But generally, there's a number of different things that we can do. The class characteristics are non-specific, but can exclude certain things. So they're useful for grouping. They're useful for eliminations when we have different class characteristics. It's a straightforward elimination. We don't have to do a microscopic comparison. When I talk about a more specific comparison, I'm usually talking about individual characteristics. However, you can look back at class characteristics and you can say, based on different databases, that certain class characteristics are known to be used in specific manufacturers, which doesn't eliminate any specific manufacturers either, because manufacturing specifications change. However, as an investigative lead, we can use the databases to inform detectives of certain manufacturers that they should look for. And occasionally, if you have different class characteristics of different groups of cartridge cases, you can associate different groups of cartridge cases with different groups of bullets. However, that's not to indicate that they were fired in the same firearm.
Okay.
Beyond that, we can also look at the design specifications of bullets. Different manufacturers of cartridges use different bullet designs. So occasionally we can associate a bullet design with a specific manufacturer of a cartridge case, and sometimes not. It just depends on what we have.
Okay. Were you able to match 86C and 7 and 8 to any of the cartridge cases?
86C, no. I wouldn't associate it with any specific manufacturer, although and it's difficult to see, but 86C has internal ribs. And to my knowledge, I have never seen that in anything but bullets which are manufactured by or for federal. So it's an association, but the strength of the association may not be strong. Occasionally, you will see manufacturers will actually manufacture components for other companies. It doesn't make much sense from the marketing standpoint, but occasionally you'll see things loaded by Remington for federal. So just because it's something which you see normally associated with federal doesn't mean that it couldn't be loaded by another manufacturer. 90 and 91, which are states exhibits, states exhibits 7 and 8 bear deep scores on the nose where the pedals are, which I generally also associate with federal. But again, I wouldn't, that isn't to say that I believe that they were loaded by federal, only that in my experience, that's where I have encountered it.
Now, the cartridge cases that you were given, those are the items that are ejected out of the gun, correct?
Correct.
All right. And the bullets are the items that come out of the barrel, right?
Down the barrel, out the barrel, and towards the target, yes.
Okay. 86C, 7 and 8, as you've stated, are 2 bullets and a bullet fragment.
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to match any of those, or are you able to match any of those to any of the cartridge cases that you received for comparison?
No.
Now, you talked before about how the casings are ejected out of an automatic firearm.
Yes.
Okay, and there are different factors that one might consider when trying to figure that out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Might one of those factors be, of course, you said how the particular firearm is manufactured, and I think you talked about some cartridge casings can be ejected to the right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And some can be ejected straight up.
Yes.
Wouldn't you also want to consider things like how the firearm was being held?
Yes, I mentioned that.
Okay. So if someone was rotating the firearm to the side and it had an upward ejection, might that eject the item to the left?
Yes.
And once the cartridge casing is ejected from the firearm, wouldn't things like other factors, environmental factors, like the grade surface on the ground, if it's ejected and lands on the ground, wouldn't that be a factor as to whether it would roll if it was on a hill?
Of course.
And what about wind? If it would
Yes.
blow from wind? How about cars knocking them or tires moving them if they were picked up in one place and then deposited in another place?
Yes.
And then how about people, foot traffic? Might that disturb the cartridge casings and move them?
Of course.
But when you are sent these items, you don't have any of that information.
No.
You're comparing the items that you're given to see if you can come up with an analysis of what kind of class, and then if you can compare them to something else to make a closer determination?
Right. Actually, in our laboratory currently, due to all of the factors that you and I mentioned, we currently do not perform any type of ejection pattern analysis because we are not able to control for those factors. Even if we have information that a firearm is being held in a particular way, used with this particular type of information, even slightly changing the angle may change where the cartridge case lands. We're not able to control for factors like what surface it lands on. We're not able to control for factors like intervening objects. Is there a tree or a person or a window or anything else in the way? So currently at our laboratory, we do not test firearms to see how far and where they throw or eject the cartridge cases because we're not able to control for those factors in any experiment that we would do.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Jankowicz?
You had no actual firearms to test, did you?
Objection based on the pretrial discussion.
Okay, I'll withdraw the question, Judge. And from your examination, you can't say who fired what or as far as those cartridge casings, can you?
No, I don't have any opinion as to who fired any of the cartridge cases or
And
bullets.
your opinion is there were 3 separate firearms?
3 separate firearms represented among the cartridge cases and at least 2 firearms represented among the bullets. Whether those intersect, I can't say.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Gorley?
Thank you, Your Honor. You mentioned that in your proficiency testing, that an organization called, I believe CTS does the testing, is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, what does CTS stand for?
I cannot recall off the top of my head. The TS is for testing services. CTS forensics is the particular branch.
We don't know what the C stands for then.
I cannot remember.
Okay. And who grades these proficiency exams?
They're graded by CTS.
Okay. Do you know anything about the background of these graders at all?
The background of what?
Of the people that grade your proficiency exams? Any idea?
I know that before the tests are issued to the various agencies that have purchased them, they usually do like a pre-test
I'm just asking if you have any idea of the qualifications of the people examining, or the person that examines your
I've-
proficiencies.
Well, in terms of who's examining the proficiencies, it's basically a sheer right-wrong. The proficiencies are all the same. So, for example, 1 year they'll fire 3 different firearms.
I'm just asking who.
Okay.
The only question is who. Do you know who graded you? Who was the teacher that passed you, I guess, for lack of a better analogy?
No.
Okay. And since you don't know them, you don't know their qualifications, correct?
No.
Okay. Now, as part of your analysis on the casings, you indicated that there are certain unique characteristics of firearms that make marks on casings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. One of those being a firearm, and I think if I heard you, firing pin, I'm sorry. One of those firing pins, I believe if I heard you correctly, you indicated if it makes an elliptical mark, it could not be made by a round firing pin. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And is that vice versa also?
Correct.
In your analysis of these 3 separate casings, were you able to determine a shape of the mark on the casings?
Yes.
Okay, what was that?
They're all, let's say, roughly hemispherical.
I'm sorry?
All 3.
Spherical? Like that?
Hemispherical.
What does that mean? Half circle?
Dome.
Dome.
Dome-shaped on the end.
All right. And so, also you indicated as part of your unique identifying characteristics, ejector marks, correct?
When present, yes.
Okay. Were there ejector marks present in any of the 3s?
If I can refer to my notes for a
Sure.
moment. The cartridge cases in States Exhibit 14 all have ejector marks.
You indicate all of them, every single cartridge has an ejector mark. Okay.
Yes.
That was unique to those and not to others.
Well, the ejector marks weren't the primary basis of the identification.
Okay.
So I don't recall how unique the ejector mark may have been because it's not what I based my conclusion on.
And is it fair to say that the hemispherical firing pin marks that were on all 3 of them, you base your distinguishing between 1 firearm, 2 firearm, 3 firearm on the location of those ejector marks?
No.
Okay. What was the unique characteristic?
I think the easiest way to say what is different is to describe the particular class characteristics of each of the 3 groups, and then it may become obvious how they are different.
I don't need you to describe each characteristic, just in general, how are they different? Was it a mark? Was it a scratch? Was it a...
No, it's a class difference.
Okay.
There's different class characteristics between the 3 groups. So the firing pin mark, the type of marks within that dome shape, in other words, the particular marks that are there.
Are we dealing with depth and, or dimension as far as size?
No, there's a central defect, and as I said, it's a little bit easier to talk about what's different if I can tell you what's there. But in terms of all of the cartridge cases in States Exhibit 14 have concentric circles. So in other words, that you have a circle, and then you have a circle within a circle, and a circle within a circle. As you look in this sort of bowl-shaped impression, you can see that there are circles that go up the sides.
The others did not.
Well, concentric circles were also present in B and C, in State's Exhibit 15, but they were different. So it's the character of it is different. Likewise, the character of B and C is that there are some crosshatch marks where that was not present in A, D, E, and F in State's Exhibit 15, nor was it present in State's Exhibit 14. With respect to A, D, E, and F, the firing pin impression was relatively smooth, except near the bottom of the impression there was a larger defect, which was not present in State's Exhibit 14, nor was it present in B or C in State's Exhibit 15.
Okay, thank you. What happens when a cartridge casing is partially ejected in a semi-automatic firearm?
Well, it depends on how far the cartridge case comes out. It rarely happens that the breech face moves slightly to the rear, and due to insufficient pressure or insufficient resistance to recoil, the cartridge case can actually be slightly fed back into the chamber. If it makes it far enough out that the forward end of the cartridge case clears the chamber, but either does not strike the ejector or does not strike it with enough force to eject it, it may end up where the cartridge case is actually stuck in the ejection port or somewhere else in the action, and that would cause a jam of the firearm.
Is the firearm capable of being used if the cartridge is jammed or stuck in the firing part?
No.
Okay. And what has to happen in order for the firearm to be useful again?
You have to clear the jam and load another cartridge into the chamber.
With those type of cartridge, would you see, as part of your analysis, casing that had been jammed and cleared?
Sometimes you will. Sometimes, generally the marks that you're going to see are the marks where either the front part of the cartridge case hits the back, either bottom or top part of the chamber, and you'll actually see an impact mark. The other type of mark that you may see will come from the slide as it closes, but it's closing under spring pressure, so it's moving relatively quickly, and it may leave an impact mark when it stovepipes. But all of that depends on the amount of force involved, and it's pretty variable. I didn't make any notations of anything like that in this case.
There weren't any notations in the casings that you examined of any jam marks in there?
Right, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, just that I didn't see any marks indicative of that.
And you examined those for that, correct? As part of your entire examination of the casings?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'd like to
Sure.
check something. Among the 21 cartridge cases in States Exhibits 14 and 15, there are 3 which have post-firing damage. I don't have any indication based on my notes as to what the cause of that damage may have been.
Do you know whether that damage could have been caused by a car running over it or stepped on or anything like that?
I don't have any indication based on what I've recorded.
How long typically would it take to clear a jam bullet in a semi-automatic firearm? And I understand that there are jams that are easy to clear and there are jams that are hard to clear, depending upon where the cartridge is or the casing is.
Yeah, I really don't have any good answer for that, other than to say anywhere from a fraction of a second to, hours and a hammer.
And if, big hammer,
I have had to clear a jam with a hammer.
and in order for that jam, the firearm would have to be, depending upon the jam, I mean, a fraction of a second, it would be partially jammed and potentially fall out, correct?
Right.
Okay. Depending upon the jam, you would have to stop shooting it and then either manually pull the cartridge out, or as you said, use a big hammer and hammer it out.
Well, I don't know that I've ever actually hammered the cartridge case itself out. But yeah, if the firearm has jammed, and again, if you have a stovepipe, we're talking about something which is on the order generally of a few seconds, depending on the design of the firearm. So, basically what that involves is it involves pulling the slide back a little bit. Generally, you can shake it just a little bit and the cartridge case will simply fall out. If you have had another cartridge partially feed from the magazine, it may have blocked a cartridge which is still stuck in the chamber. It may actually block it in there and you can't pull it out anymore because the extractor isn't engaging with that cartridge case. You have to drop the magazine, then close the chamber, pull the slide back, hope the extractor catches on that cartridge case, and hope that it extracts at that point. I've had cartridge cases that it just won't extract. You have to put something down the barrel while either holding the slide back or locking the slide back and poke it out from the front, at which point it falls out. It's completely dependent upon what you have.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions.
You redirect?
When Ms. Hawthorne was asking you questions, she was asking about exhibits 86, C, 90, 91, which are exhibits here today, 7, 8, and 33, within exhibit 33, correct?
Correct.
You said that those were consistent, the projectiles and the jacket were consistent with having been manufactured by the Federal Cartridge Corporation?
They are consistent with bullets which I have encountered in cartridges, in boxes with, marketed by Federal previously. But again, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily say that they were either loaded or made by Federal. They may have been loaded or made by someone else.
Okay. In exhibit 6, I believe it would be our exhibit 15 today. Who was the manufacturer of these cartridge casings based on the head stamp?
Based on the head stamp, they were either marketed or made by Winchester.
And what about exhibit 14?
FC, which is indicative of Federal.
So while you can't, just because the manufacturers mix and match, you cannot conclusively say, yes, they came from the Federal.
Right, they're associated, but perhaps not from the same firearm.
One moment.
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions.
Anything? Ms. Hawthorne?
Very briefly. The term consistent with does not mean absolute match, correct?
Correct.
And thank you.
Nothing further.
No questions, Your Honor.
All right.
No, sir.
Okay, very good.
Nice
Is she excused?
Yes, excuse.
All right, you may go about your business, ma'am. All right, ladies and gentlemen, your lunch arrived fairly early. So for those of you that ordered something that was intended to be eaten warm, there is a microwave in fairly close proximity. If it's just too cold to eat, we might be able to heat it back up for you. It is all packaged in styrofoam, so it may be okay. It's been here about a half an hour now. So, but with that, you will be excused for lunch. We will be in recess again until approximately 1 o'clock. It's now 11:50, and that'll be give or take when you all are ready to come out. So, all right, please enjoy your lunch, and again, do not discuss the case.